And here we sit with Friday Live for further readings in the novel Anyone Got a Match by Max Schulman, with a quick nod to the spring equinox, which appeared between the last Friday Live and this one of my favorite times of year, basking in it, feeling all kinds of things about it, enjoying everything. So let's take a look at chapter 3. Should I recap a little? Only a tiny bit. Chapter 1 introduced us to the Tatums, parent Jefferson, son Virgil. And chapter 2 introduced us to the Shapians, husband Ira and wife Polly. The link between the two is a mysterious woman named Barbara Ogilvy Owens, or Boo. Chapter 3. The Owenses of Owens Mill disembarked from their helicopter in the clearing before the hunting lodge, ran inside with many a laugh and cheer, and fell joyfully upon the food and spirits there arrayed. For 3 hours they ate and drank and gamed, and then the mood for singing seized them in its playful spell. Mrs. Barbara Ogilvy Owens, better known to her many friends as Boo, therefore moved to the piano to take her accustomed position as accompanist. Boo moved gracefully. She sat erectly on the piano bench. The years had not sprung her fluent carriage, nor thickened her willowy waist. Her breasts were high, her throat was smooth, her back was straight, her belly was flat, her legs were long, strong, and marvelously articulated. A whisper of gray in the tips of her ash-blonde hair, a faint tracing of lines beside the patrician mouth were time's only discernible testimony. Yet she looked her age. No man mistook her for 20 or even 30, but neither did any man fail to feel a pleasant itch upon regarding her. As Boo arranged the sheet music, Virgil Tatum sat down beside her. "Would you like me to turn pages for you?" he asked. "I don't believe so, thank you," she replied pleasantly. "In that case, would you like to marry me?" said Virgil. "Tell you what," said Boo, "you can turn pages." "Ah, good. Then you're not angry at me. For what?" "Why, for this unseemly haste, of course," he said. "I mean proposing marriage when your late husband has been gone scarcely 18 years. "On second thought, you can't turn pages," said Boo, shoving him hard with her lean, trim buttocks. Virgil sat firm. "Boo, dear Boo," he said earnestly, "all these years without a man, what are you trying to prove?" "Virgil, dear Virgil," she mocked, "what are you trying to prove? How many times have I offered to take you to my beach house for a road weekend, mad weekend of sinful pleasure?" "Very amusing," he said. "Come on, let's get back to marriage." Boo laughed. "Oh, Virgil, you're too perfect. All you need is a butternut uniform, a sash, and a sword. Southern ladies, sir, for marrying, sir, not dallying. For that there's places in Memphis. Right, cousin? All right, so I'm a little old-fashioned. Try obsolete. Talking. Come out from behind that Spanish moss, Miss Melanie, and answer me a question. This beach house of yours, have you ever invited anyone who might really go?" Well, no. Next question. In the last 18 years, have you ever once seriously considered a proposal of marriage? Never mind mine. I mean all the others you've had. "All right, Virgil, I'll admit it. I'm obsolete too. Maybe extinct," he said, "and it's got me worried." "That's very kind of you, but I'll be just fine, thanks." Virgil shook his head gravely. "I'm not so sure. I've been reading this article on prolonged sexual incontinence. Continence. Do you know it's 100% fatal?" "Oh, dear me!" exclaimed William Ransom Owens, first cousin to Boo and third cousin to Virgil, who had just walked up behind them. William Ransom was plump, smooth, pink, trusting, 32 years old, and a virgin. Some uncharitable people said he was a homosexual, but he was not. Perhaps he would have been, only he had never heard of it. He stood now in a costume he had carefully selected for this woodsy weekend of roughing it, a suede Lincoln green jacket that was almost a doublet, narrow Lincoln green trousers that were almost hose, and ankle-high laceless Lincoln green boots of glove-soft leather. He had toyed with the idea of adding a deep-throated blouse with ruffled pleats, but abandoned the notion out of an accurate fear that Uncle Jefferson Tatum would seize him by the ruffles and flang him down the mountain. William Ranson, like the other Owens men, was a kind of executive of the Tatum Cigarette Company. He had an imposing title, a Bigelow on the floor, and a total lack of authority. William Ransom was listed on the corporate roster as Director of Education and Morale, which meant he chose the country and Western music that was piped through the factory by Muzak all day. "You're just funning, aren't you, Cousin Virgil?" said William Ransom nervously. "I mean, about the article you were discussing, about prolonged sexual continence will kill you?" "Yes, William Ransom," Virgil assured him, "a little joke is all." "Whew," said William Ransom, vastly relieved. "Of course, I'm not really worried. I mean, I'll surely find a girl soon. Won't I?" he added doubtfully. "No question about it," Virgil answered firmly. William Ransom beamed. "Cousin Boo," he said, "what say we sing some good old songs of the 30s? "By all means, Cousin William Ransom," she said, "but would you mind gathering the others? It's so much nicer when we start together." "Why, sure, Cousin Boo," said William Ransom, and scurried around the room and collected his various kinfolk, all of them officers of the Tatum Cigarette Company, all holding executive positions equal in responsibility to William Ransom's. William Ransom next proceeded to round up guests who were not members of the family, for no more Owenses remains to be tapped. There had been one more Owens present, but only briefly. This was Gabriel Owens Fuller, Boo's boy, who had dropped everyone off at the lodge and then flown the helicopter back home to Owens Mill so he could finish work on a digital computer he was building. Aeronautics and physics held no riddles for 18-year-old Gabriel. Only the ultimate mystery baffled him: girls. "Hurry, William Ransom," he called Boo from the piano bench, for the singers had assembled and were clamoring for a downbeat. "Yes, Cousin Boo," cried William Ransom, and hastened to gather the remaining voices. He spied a grotesquely large neck hunched over the bar and laid a timid finger on it. "Mr. Myers, sir," he said, essaying a tentative smile, "would you care to go over to the piano and sing?" "Sing my ass," replied 19 Myers, glowering so fiercely that William Ransom went almost Lincoln Green. "Just thought I'd ask," stammered William Ransom, and backed rapidly away. 19, muttering, returned to his bottle. No glass, just a bottle. He hated his weekends at the hunting lodge, and the fact is, everybody hated having him there. All the same, a deal was a deal, and 19 was not about to give up one single speck of one single thing that was coming to him. 19's contract clearly called for free board and room at the Tatum Hunting Lodge on every weekend outside the football season. It was the least of the benefits in 19's agreement with Acanthus College. He had the huge marble house on campus, the one with the stained glass windows, rent-free and staffed with 3 Negro servants. He had an annual salary of $40,000 as head coach, plus 2 new Cadillacs every year, a red sedan and a red convertible. For all of this, Jefferson Tatum footed the bill without complaint. He was content with his coach. Year after year, 19 disappeared into the canebrake and emerged with an awesome bag of huge, infrangible, mouth-breathing young men who loved bodily contact better than anything you could name. Sometimes Jefferson suspected that 19 could not simply be finding such people. He had to be breeding them in some secret place, a hollow mountain, perhaps. But Jefferson never inquired. All he cared to know was that the Owens Mill Municipal Stadium was jammed with 55,000 ecstatic fans at each game. Jefferson was aware, as others in comparable positions have been aware before him, that to rule a city you must provide circuses as well as bread. "Gentlemen, gentlemen," cried William Ransom, detecting the final 2 guests skulking in the pantry. "Why, I do believe you're hiding." They shuffled their feet guiltily, for hiding is precisely what they had been doing. They were dressed in blue suits, vests, starched collars, dark ties, and rimless glasses, and they had not come to the lodge to make wassail. In fact, they were guests only in a manner of speaking. Both were officers of the Tatum Cigarette Company, but neither was an Owens, and consequently they were answerable for their conduct. T.T. Wilcox, an accountant aged 66 years, was vice president of the firm, and Noah Fenster, a chemist aged 59 years, was director of research. Jefferson Tatum had summoned them this weekend, summoned, not invited, to justify the company's last fiscal statement, and if there was one thing in the world they did not feel like, it was singing. But William Ransom would brook no objections. "Pish tush," he said blithely, as they tried to tell him they could not carry a tune, and besides they had laryngitis, and moreover they were tone deaf, and in any case the only song they knew was Trees. "I've found the rascals, Cousin Boo," crowed William Ransom as he hauled to them, kicking feebly, to the piano. Boo smiled approval, ran an arpeggio, and the songs of the 1930s commenced. First came "The Music Goes Round and Round" as a kind of flexor for the chorale. Next came the Hutsut song, in case the first flexor had not quite flexed everybody. Then, confident they were flexed, Boo trusted them with Small Hotel and Funny Valentine. Then came Isle of Capri, during which a nostalgic shimmer appeared behind T.T. Wilcox's spectacles, and he actually hummed 2.5 bars before he was silenced by a glare from Noah Fenster. Then Boo, shifting moods, swung into the rousing rhythms of Strike Up the Band and Louisiana Hayride. Then the bedroom door opened, and Jefferson Tatum appeared and looked upon the rebels as Charlton Heston had looked upon the children of Israel when he surprised them doing a hora around the golden calf. "Stop the music!" roared Jefferson in a voice so loud that William Ransom jumped squealing into the arms of 19 Myers. The other Owenses fell into a timorous silence, except for Boo. She was the only Owens not frightened of Jefferson. In fact, she was quite fond of the old pirate. Jefferson liked Boo too, and would have been delighted to have her as a daughter-in-law. Failing that, he would have thoroughly enjoyed jumping on her elegant bones. But he had no eyes for Boo as he advanced, dark as a thundercloud, into the room. "If you got to sing," he snarled at the huddled carolers, "how about 'Nearer, My God, to Thee'? That's customary, ain't it, when the ship is sinking?" "What ship, Uncle Jefferson?" asked William Ransom. "The Tatum Cigarette Company, that's what ship, you ninny!" shouted Jefferson. "We're going under like an anvil." Virgil concealed a grin. For a man facing a watery death, he thought old Jefferson was sure a sound sleeper. He had napped through 3 hours of merrymaking just outside his door, not to speak of the landing and takeoff of a 2-rotored helicopter. But Virgil discreetly kept his thoughts to himself. "You've all read the last financial statement," Jefferson went on. "That so-called Surgeon General is ruining us, and you stand here and sing. Ain't nobody, for Christ's sake, got no ideas?" "I have, Uncle Jefferson," said Robert E. Lee Owens. Lee, at 29, the youngest of the Owenses, was also the most serious. His title was Director of Public Image. What's more, he believed it. He was all the time consulting motivational researchers, writing memos, drawing graphs, and carrying a briefcase. "I have some ideas," said Lee, unzipping his briefcase. "You have oatmeal for brains is what you have," said Jefferson. He turned to T.T. Wilcox. You're supposed to be the vice president. What the hell have you been doing?" "Everything I can, sir," said Mr. Wilcox, licking his dry lips. "We've dropped all our crime shows on television and switched entirely to wholesome family comedies. And if I may say so, sir, it seems to be effective. Tatum's are still the #1 cigarette in the country. Of course, I know sales were down last year, but all cigarettes fell off." "And a good thing," rumbled 19 Myers, looking up from his bottle. "Them lousy cigarettes play hell with your wind. Brother, I catch any of my athletes smoking, it's 200 laps around the track." Jefferson clenched his hands tightly. If he did not need this cretin, he would have fired him long ago. But he did need him, so he squinched down his temper and forced a smile. 19, old buddy," he said winsomely, "how would you like to go outside and dig a few stumps?" "Later, maybe," said 19. "I got some whiskey to finish." "You do that," said Jefferson. "It's good for you. Not like cigarettes." "Sir," said Noah Fenster, Director of Research, "I'd be glad to dig some stumps." "You stay right here," said Jefferson, grabbing Mr. Fenster by the necktie. "What the hell's been going on in that lab of yours? Where's the new filter you said you're developing, the one that's so all-fired effective?" "Well, I did develop it, sir," answered Mr. Fenster, perspiring, "and it is remarkably effective. Trouble is, you can't get any smoke through it." Jefferson released Mr. Fenster's necktie and heaved a long, racking sigh. "So we're licked, is that it? We just lay back and wait for the so-called Surgeon General to put us out of business?" "Uncle Jefferson," said Lee Owens, "I have made a survey of our problem, a study in depth, you might call it." "Shut up," said Jefferson. "I won't shut up," declared Lee with a rush of determination. "You just listen to me, Uncle Jefferson. I have talked to dozens of experts in psychology and motivational research, and I have gathered all the findings of the Tobacco Industry Research Council, and you are going to listen to me." The Owenses looked up with trembling as Jefferson's color rose. "Listen to him, Pa," said Virgil quietly. The old man's color subsided. "All right, Sonny," he said to Lee. "Go ahead." Lee reached into his briefcase and removed a sheaf of papers. "First of all, let's take the work of the Tobacco Industry Research Council, to which we all belong. The council, as you know, provides generous grants with no strings attached to any reputable independent research organization, public or private, that wishes to make studies of smoking. So far, we have spent $8 million through the Tobacco Industry Research Council, not to mention the $10 million grant we just gave the American Medical Association to make a 4-year study of the effects of tobacco. By all means, Sonny, let's don't mention the $10 million grant to the AMA, said Jefferson. That's a simple horse trade like you'll find in any political backroom in the country. I'm only guessing, of course, but it seems to me you don't need to be a genius to figure that one out. We hand the AMA $10 million to play with for 4 years. What they get back is a pledge from all the tobacco state senators and congressmen to keep Medicare bottled up in committee for 4 more years. Looks to me like an ordinary everyday piece of log rolling. No, Sonny, forget AMA and get back to the deal with no strings. The $8 million we've handed the Tobacco Industry Research Council. What have we got to show for it? I am glad you asked that question, Uncle Jefferson, said Lee, opening a folder. I have here reports from nearly 100 unimpeachable cigarette scientists which completely exonerate cigarettes. Exonerate, shouted Jefferson. Unimpeachable. $8 million we give away, and for this we get exonerate. But that's the word, exonerate. Nobody at Johns Hopkins or Sloan Kettering or anywhere has yet found a carcinogen in tobacco. Carcinogen, mumbled Jefferson. Dandy. And here is the Berkson report, Lee continued, waving a paper. Dr. Joseph Berkson, no less, the chief of biometry at Mayo Clinic. Biometry, said Jefferson. Very nice. Yes, Sonny. Let's talk about Dr. Berkson's report. Happens I know it real good. He said a causal significance had been erroneously assigned to a statistical association. He said, and I quote, "It is a notorious example of what Alfred North Whitehead has called the fallacy of misplaced concreteness." Sonny, I got to admit it. There now is one hell of a battle cry. But, sir, Jefferson, livid, was pacing back and forth, waving his arms wildly, and Virgil whispered to Boo, "Here comes the black hat." "The what?" said Boo, mystified. "Listen," whispered Virgil. "For God's love," cried Jefferson, "why are we talking about Alfred North Whitehead when we ought to be out looking for a black hat?" "Who ought to?" asked William Ransom Owens. "We," answered Jefferson, "the cigarette industry. We got to find a black hat." "I see," said William Ransom, who did not. "You all been to the cowboy movies," said Jefferson. "When the bad guy comes in, what's he got on his head? A black hat. You know right away he's the bad guy, and you're properly scared." "Why, that's true," exclaimed William Ransom, "like in Shane and High Noon and like that." "Thank you," said Jefferson, with a tight smile at William Ransom. "A black hat means bad, means dangerous, means death. And that's what the so-called Surgeon General got going for him. A black hat, cigarettes, coffin nails, gaspers, a black hat if ever there was one. Is it any wonder people are scared of cigarettes?" "Damn well ought to be," muttered 19 Myers. "Terrible for your wind." But Jefferson was too wound up to notice. "A black hat," he cried. "That's what we got to find. We're in a war to the finish with this so-called Surgeon General, and we ain't going to win it with $10 words. That guy is trading in fear. And fear is something you can only fight with fear, not with Alfred North Whitehead. Say, who the hell is he anyhow?" "A famous Western bad man," said Virgil. "Oh, clever," said Jefferson balefully. "We'll have many a chuckle about that after the bankruptcy hearing." "Uncle Jefferson," said Lee, "I quite understand what you mean by the black hat. There is no doubt that the Surgeon General has fear on his side. For instance, I have here a report." He produced another folder, "which was done for me by a prominent motivational research organization. This report proves conclusively, now mark this well, that 96% of all Americans associate cigarette smoking with sin." Jefferson accepted the intelligence calmly. "How much did this report cost you?" he asked. Cost me." $15,000, answered Lee. "Or was it 50,000? I could look it up." "Why, you 12-thumbed idiot," roared Jefferson. "I could have told you for free that people think cigarettes are the road to perdition. Ain't you never heard one of them Bible thumpers?" "No, I guess you're too young." "Well, I heard plenty of them. Old-time, bull-voiced hellfire shouters. Cigarettes, they said, are the instruments of the devil. And make no mistake, Sonny, people believed it. Of course, they didn't stop smoking, nor more than they stopped drinking or humping, but every time they took a puff, there was a little pinch of guilt, the same kind of sinful feeling they felt the first time they snuck a smoke behind the barn. Down deep in their gut, they knew the Lord would call for a reckoning someday. Well, Sonny, this makes pretty easy picking for the new breed of hellfire shouters. Oh, it's a new breed, all right. They ain't Christ-bitten country boys this time, not backwoods bumpkins with hay in their hair. Now they're all nice, smooth-talking fellows with white smocks and medical degrees. They ain't threatening damnation on that far-off judgment day. They got it for you right here and now. I mean lung cancer. I do wish you'd read my memos, Uncle Jefferson, said Lee with an edge of exasperation. I covered all this months ago. We're up against a scare campaign. I know that. But the other side has all the scare techniques. We have none. So let's stop looking for a black hat. Let's instead try a brand new approach to the smoking public, a campaign of moderation. Let's go partway with the Surgeon General's committee. Let's concede that too much smoking might hurt you. Never, thundered Jefferson, the cords popping out on his neck. Never! For heaven's sake, Uncle Jefferson, too much anything might hurt you. Apples, milk, even vitamins. The old man opened his mouth to shout again, but suddenly he closed it. A flicker of interest danced over his eyes. He addressed Lee quietly. What did you say, Sonny? I said too much anything might hurt you, Lee repeated. Apples? Asked Jefferson. Milk? Vitamins? Why, sure, said Lee. Jefferson turned to Noah Fenster. Fenster, you're a chemist. Is this true? Well, not normally, of course, answered Mr. Fenster, but in excessive amounts, I'd have to say yes. How come? Asked Jefferson. His voice was calm, but there was a mounting brightness in his eyes. In the case of apples, said Mr. Fenster, they are generally sprayed with pesticide, which is a poison. Milk is a prime source of cholesterol, and in many areas, it also contains a heavy concentration of strontium-90. Even vitamins in a massive overdose have been known to kill people. Well, well, said Jefferson thoughtfully. Go on, Fenster. Tell me some more stuff that'll poison you. Practically anything if you take too much of it. Water? Yes, provided the fluorine limit is above the permissible limit. Bread? Possibly. It depends on the bleach and the emulsifiers. What's that? Additives, explained Mr. Fenster. Almost any food you eat today has a certain amount of chemicals added to it. To begin with, there's fertilizer to make it grow. Then there's pesticides to keep the bugs off. Then when the food gets processed, there's additives, coloring agents, flavoring agents, softeners, preservatives, things like that. They're all chemicals, and they're all poisonous if you go beyond the allowable levels. But don't the government keep a watch on all this? Golly, Uncle Jefferson, said Lee impatiently, what's all this talk about food? Let's get back to my plan. Shut up, you Arnold Benedict, said Jefferson. Go ahead, Fenster. What about the government? Yes, said Fenster. FDA, that's the Food and Drug Administration, sets the permissible dose for all the chemicals that go into our food, but there's some who say FDA is much too lenient. Who says so? Asked Jefferson sharply. Well, of course, the health food addicts. Jefferson made a gesture of dismissal. Scratch them, bunch of nuts, probably communists too. What I want to know is, does anybody reliable knock FDA? Oh, yes, rather a large number of doctors, scientists, nutritionists, chemists. For example, a few years back, a woman named Rachel Carson, a highly respected biologist, wrote a book called Silent Spring, in which she claimed our food is loaded with deadly pesticides. People believe this book? Quite a few, including the President's Science Advisory Committee. But nobody stopped eating, did they? Mr. Fenster began a little smile, thinking perhaps Jefferson was making a joke. But Jefferson's face was serious, in fact, glazed. He turned abruptly away from Mr. Fenster and walked to a chair in the corner of the room. Completely oblivious of his guests, he sat as though sculpted by Rodin, thinking silently, furiously, passionately. Everyone watched with astonishment, but they stayed quiet, not daring to intrude on such monumental concentration. Their astonishment doubled when, after a moment, Virgil, who was seated on the piano bench with Boo, suddenly assumed precisely the same look and the same pose as old Jefferson. Fully 5 minutes went by while the Tatums, father and son, were locked in their separate reveries. The only sound in the room was the steady, rhythmic glug of Jack Daniels from the bottle to the glottis of 19 Myers. It was Boo who spoke first. Virgil, she whispered, plucking at his sleeve. What's going on? Hush, said Virgil, absently. I will not hush, said Boo. What are you thinking about? What's Uncle Jefferson thinking about? Virgil emerged from his trance. He sat up straight on the piano bench. On his face there was a wide, happy grin. What was it you asked? he said to Boo. I asked what you and your father were thinking about. And I shall tell you, said Virgil, his grin widening. My father is thinking that he might have found himself a black hat. And me, he laughed aloud, pulled Boo to him, and planted an exuberant kiss on her cheek. Me, I'm thinking I might have found one too. There concludes chapter 3. I'll look forward to seeing you next week.